Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're giving people just another minute or two to sign on, and then we'll get started with today's panel discussion. Until then, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got Fortify, Henkel, HP. We've got Fast Radius. I'm here from Additive Integrity. We're all looking forward to a great conversation today, and we're just going to give it another quick second, give people that time to log on. So get comfortable, grab a cup of tea, have some water, and get ready. We're going to talk end-use 3D printing for production. It's going to be great. I'm going to take my own advice. It looks like we've got a good bit of our live attendees here with us already, so thank you again for joining us, and welcome to today's panel discussion. We're here today for a conversation in additive manufacturing. We have a great panel of experts joining us today from a variety of perspectives, so we can discuss a big issue that's facing our industry today, and that's end-use 3D printing. Our discussion today is called Crossing the Chasm, what it takes to bring new AM technologies to market for end-use part production. For additive manufacturing to reach its potential as a mainstream production methodology, applications must be the primary driver. End-use production means collaboration up and down the supply chain, from hardware, software, and materials, as well as the companies putting them to use for customers. Our panelists today represent some of the companies leading the way in applications-driven success of additive manufacturing. Over the next hour, we'll touch on topics including early adoption, the roles of contract manufacturers, OEMs, and customers in large-scale adoption, and how collaborative development can accelerate the path to volume production. We'll touch on these areas and more to highlight the risks and payoffs of end-use adoption in 3D printing. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Josh Martin, the CEO and co-founder of Fortify. Josh received his PhD in material science from Northeastern University under a National Science Foundation fellowship. He has spent the last decade working on advanced materials ranging from bio-inspired composites to multifunctional nanomaterials. Thanks for being here, Josh. Next, we have David Woodlock from New Business Incubation. David has spent the last 6 years in HP's 3D printing group, developing and scaling production applications. He now manages engagements with startups and other partners to bring new business ventures to the market enabled by additive manufacturing. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thanks.
Next, we have Ken Kisner, the head of innovation for 3D printing at Henkel. Ken joined the innovation team at Henkel Corporation as the head of innovation in 2019, bringing new capabilities to the additive manufacturing industry. Prior to Henkel, Ken was the CEO, president, and founder of Molecule Corporation, which was acquired by Henkel in 2019. Henkel's been everywhere in additive lately, so Ken, we're delighted to have you with us today. And finally, we have Dan Healy, the Senior Director of Business Development for Fast Radius, a leader in digital manufacturing. Fast Radius was named one of the 9 best factories in the world by the World Economic Forum and is a leading provider of additive manufacturing solutions, including application discovery, product design and testing, production-grade manufacturing, and global fulfillment. Dan leads Fast Radius's business development efforts, working with companies to help them unlock the value that additive manufacturing can provide. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm Sarah Goehrke. I'm a longtime AM-focused journalist and the founder of Additive Integrity. I'm delighted to be your moderator for our conversation today. We do really want it to be a conversation, and so I'd like to invite you all joining us today to participate throughout our discussion at the chat box you'll see at the side of your screen at any point. We'll be dedicating about 15 minutes at the end of the panel for Q&A, but I'll also be keeping an eye on your questions as we go, so we can bring up some relevant questions to our panelists as they arise. And that's enough for me. So all that said, let's talk adoption. David, I'd like to start with you. HP is already a case study in a company creating a new 3D printer, a new 3D printing technology, and successfully bringing it to market. Well, obviously there's still work ahead. HP has some experience already in opening up opportunities. Can we start off with some of the risks of that? How can potential OEMs like HP help to de-risk offerings in a realistic way?
Yeah, interesting question. It's about de-risking, and it's also about what drives behavior change and adoption. If you look at business and life, it's all about creating optionality. If you're a successful business person, right, you're trying to create this asymmetric risk profile. I want a limited downside with huge upside potential, right? And it's something that we should be able to create with digital manufacturing because of how flexible it is. The problem that we run into is, say you're a mid-level R&D director, right, who makes decisions about technologies. What's your risk reward for adopting additive manufacturing? The way you get fired as an R&D director is by missing a product intro, full stop, right? Miss your budget, nobody cares. Miss your product intro, you're fired, right? So any uncertainty I'm creating in their ability to get a product to market is a huge risk for them. And at the same time, their upside isn't obvious right away, right? We've focused as an industry too much on these internal champions, right? Because these internal champions are these people that see this massive upside, right? So we work with them on trying to scale it. But until you actually de-risk that R&D director, that product VP, you're not going to get any adoption. It's always going to be a battle. So how do you do that? I've seen it done a few ways. It can be things like risk sharing with some incentivized parties, part producers, OEMs, things like that. Parallel paths with multiple technologies, multiple 3D printing technologies, 3D printing technologies and injection molding technologies, creating more optionality as you adopt. Sometimes it's as simple as, showing them that you're going to be there every step of the way. And if you have to, invest in making sure that happens for them, you will, right? Just creating those relationships. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is all about convincing those managers that the risk reward profile has gotten to a point that they're acceptable with, and you won't make any progress in adoption until you get there.
Those are some great points, and especially when you were talking about optionality, I think we should kind of move that into how that works and how this all fits alongside other technologies. So Dan, Fast Radius also has a lot of experience in bringing new technology to users, and you were one of the first contract manufacturers to adopt and offer Carbon's technology, for example. What made bringing Carbon's technology appealing for Fast Radius and in turn for your customers? What is it about platform scalability that can make this a good fit, especially in a business like yours that's technology agnostic?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things that made Carbon's technology really appealing to Fast Radius. The first one is it is a production ready and a production capable platform. And I think when we look at a solution, it has to be something that long-term can provide a steady production value for the end customer. For a long time, additive was all about prototyping, quick turn front-end work, and then flipping to another technology. We want to make sure that we have technologies that we can still do those activities on the front end, but then you can convert to production in the long term. I think scalability, as you brought up, I mean, that's the second thing we look at. We have to do that front end design, development, and partnership with the customer. But ultimately, when it comes time to go to production, we have to quickly scale the platform. So with Carbon, once you have a footprint defined, you've developed the internal competency, you've got basically all your overhead is set up, to then go from a handful of printers to many printers is not a big leap. So it's a really scalable platform. And I think the last thing that really was intriguing to us on Carbon is the breadth of materials and the future roadmap there. There's a large number of materials. We work across a number of verticals. And so it's really important as we go to those different verticals, whether it's automotive, aerospace, med device, that we are able to tap into different materials that are going to best fit each of the applications we work on. So those were all significant reasons why we onboarded the Carbon platform.
It's a great list of reasons, and you're definitely touching in on a huge one when it comes to materials. So maybe we should talk about materials. Fortunately, we have an expert for that, Ken. I feel like these days we are seeing Henkel materials everywhere in 3D printing. A lot of that is coming about through partnerships and collaboration. How do you see working together as being key to Henkel's strategy, especially when it comes to heavily regulated areas like medical device manufacture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Henkel's approach is really an open ecosystem where each partner brings their greatest strengths. And there's no doubt that inside of Henkel, a 145-year-old material science company, our greatest strength is material science. And so leveraging our background on UV curable technologies, but also leveraging the background on solvent-based or water-based and seeing if we can integrate those technologies into our base resins is where we come from. But what we've learned in 3D printing, and actually Henkel as an adhesives company, they have a huge investment in bringing solutions to the customer. And we're finding out that we have to work incredibly closely and have deep knowledge in these other areas with machines, with end user needs. And your question about medical or other highly regulated, whether it's automotive or aerospace or medical, we also need to be able to address those needs or those regulations and solve those problems as well. So as a material science company, we need to understand those requirements, invest in them, and bring those solutions by working with other companies in the ecosystem. And we're dedicated to understanding as much as we need to about our ecosystem partners' business to deliver that.
Okay, fantastic. And one of those partners is, of course, Fortify. So we've been talking about a lot of the growth we've been seeing here, but out of all of the players we've got here today, Josh, Fortify is kind of still the new kid on the block. You are working with companies like Henkel and Fast Radius to develop and strategize what you're bringing to market. From your perspective, what does it mean today in 2021 to be bringing a differentiated AM technology to market, especially with materials and partnerships being so key to your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are two elements there. One on what it means to take a differentiated technology and another on how the partnership and the ecosystem we've built can really help. And on the first one, if you take a step back and look at the state of the industry, it's really amazing how many new technologies have been introduced in just the last 10 years alone, how much broader the range of materials we have available to us and some of the new software that's helping to enable further adoption. So that being said, the bar for innovation has really risen. And I think that from the go-to-market side, in some ways, the adoption energy barrier has also become a little bit more complex, especially if you're going into a production environment. And this resonates with something David had just mentioned earlier. And I was in a meeting today where the concept of complexity being an enemy of adoption came up. And I think that's very relevant here if you're bringing a differentiated technology to the market. And what that means, I feel like in this day and age, is that it requires significant application development to make sure that the end customer is successful. As Ken had mentioned, it's really important to stay solution focused. And it's really important to create abundantly clear examples that showcase the merits of a new technology. And on the partnership side, it's really about de-risking, getting to market faster. And with Henkel, we've been able to really demonstrate that with our digital tooling material, where it really de-risked a lot of the compliance and testing standards. And on the manufacturing partnership side, that's really important, especially if you want to service a customer that needs ITAR and ISO certification. And so it's really about getting to market faster and providing a better quality solution.
There are definitely a lot of considerations to bring into this, regulations, partnerships, all of these things. And of course, as we all know, when we're talking real world market conditions, we can't ignore cost. So as we broaden what we're looking at here, David, you had brought up the challenge of hidden costs of adoption when we all spoke in preparation for this panel. Can we dig a little bit into that idea, just eyeing the actual costs of adoption, where and how to invest, what new adopters might not be prepared for when they initially say, I want to bring in this technology?
Yeah. You know, it's not so much a hidden costs. I think we can all very clearly articulate, you know, all the costs that go into at least the production side. I see a lot of misunderstanding of the ecosystem and the business models that are part of it. I run into this a lot where I can describe, you know, the fundamental cost of the system, getting it to market, all of that. And then a customer will go off and get their parts quoted and, you know, they're surprised by the result. If I'm working with a big corporation trying to adopt additive manufacturing, they're used to working with a big OEM. You know, in tech, it's a Flex, it's a Jabil, it's a Foxconn. In auto, it's a Magna or whoever, right? These companies work in deal sizes in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So their SG&A as a percentage of revenue is minuscule. Their margins are in the single digits, right? So they have pricing that reflects that. Now, if you look at the business model of a traditional parts provider, it's very different, right? They have very short runs. They have a lot of different customers, a lot of different deals. Their SG&A as a percent of revenue is really high. As a result, their margins are a lot higher and their utilization is a lot lower, right? Because they want to create capacity for some of those, you know, quick turn, high value parts, right? And neither of those are wrong. You know, they've both just been optimized for different industries. One for huge volume, high revenue deals, and one for short volume, high margin deals. What we've done is we haven't educated the market on some of those discrepancies though, right? So they get confused when they go and try to quote some of these things. So what it takes to get to market is two things. It's a very clear articulation of this is the endpoint that you can get to in a scaled manufacturing process. This is how I'm going to help you bridge to get there, right? And you need both of those, and both of those have very different cost structures associated with them. And then in the industry, you see both those two players I talked about doing similar, right? You see these traditional prototyping parts producers working on new business models to help them move up into higher and higher volumes, while at the same time you see some of the more forward-looking, you know, big OEMs making it possible for companies to engage them on smaller deals, maybe smaller than they would generally look at. So both sides are coming towards this middle and trying to help people close this gap going from prototyping to production. But again, a lot of the costs aren't something that you would, you know, they're not the printer, they're, you know, the material. It's a fundamental business model question that we're starting to answer.
And David, we did have a question come in for you also already. And I feel like this ties into costs in a different sort of way. The question is HP happy with the progression / speed of materials development through the open platform?
Everybody always wants everything to go faster, right? So, you know, I think there was originally thought that you need to create every material that's available for injection molding. We want to have that material to be 3D printed, right? And it was a very one-to-one kind of materials focus. That's not really the way to go, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to collect functional attributes, right? I don't need to create an ABS to replace this ABS, right? I need something with good cold weather, impact strength, and, you know, medium stiffness. Or I need something with high lubricity to do this, right? So what you're seeing is instead of, okay, we need to create every material, let's look at the functional attributes that we need for different applications, let's group them, and let's find materials that can do those things.
Yeah, I think that is, that kind of ties into some of my responsibility of delivering materials. And what we're finding is the same thing, is people have a massive amount of history with thermoplastics in being injection molded, as an example. And coming in with 3D printing, there are a lot of different variables that are initiated or brought into the process from the actual base technology of being 3D printed. And so whether it's, no matter what the technology is, even if you're using a thermoplastic, in our case, we're using predominantly thermosets. We're having to educate the customer to understand what are their true needs, because I get every day, I want all these properties that I found on the internet that's polypropylene, or I want all these properties that I found on the internet that's ABS, and really working with finding out the user needs of what they're trying to address in their process and their product has been, I've learned a lot by going through that, because you often find out that they don't need a tensile strength of X or a modulus of Y. What they really need is a product that has these other properties, and delivering that as an organization. And that kind of brings into some of the other concept of what our industry needs to do right now is grow the pie. You know, addressing the same problem, all of us addressing the same problem and competing with each other to try to win a piece of business is not really helping the industry, where we need, there's, you know, we've covered 2% of the applications out there today, let's say. We need to be growing the pie and addressing the other 98%. And that's been one of my key focuses at Henkel, is making sure that we're not just copying somebody else's product and bringing it to market. That's already been invented. Great, they deserve to make some money off that and own that piece of the market. And so really addressing new needs and spending the time with those customers to bring solutions.
And kind of add to that, I would say too, when we're looking for, you know, how we grow that pie and find the next application, you know, keeping in mind what the capabilities of the additive platforms that are out there and what they can do, and how that's an advantage over traditional manufacturing technologies. And say, hey, we've got some areas where we know if we can make these components using additive technology, it's vastly better from a value standpoint for the customer. And then looking at, okay, what materials do we need now that we've identified the application that we know is going to be beneficial to produce an additive? And I think that marrying up of application and then the material after that, it'd be very helpful to us in the future as we look to develop the right materials as solutions.
Definitely, and we did have a question come in following on Ken's last point, saying, following on Ken's last point, how much of the hurdle is on the front end?
I guess my easiest answer is nothing's easy in this industry. So as soon as you think you've achieved something, you have more work to do. So there is a lot of work done on the front end, because you can save work down the road by focusing on the right, let's say, material properties or conditions, or the workflow. Exactly how are we going to be setting up the file, or how are we going to be post-processing that product? Understanding as much upfront as possible is super important, but also nothing's easy. You have to go work the problem as they come up, and that partnership is really important, that somebody doesn't feel stranded, kind of like David was, you know, addressing with this middle manager or production manager, suddenly feeling alone with a problem that we need to, as an industry, support that person through the problems.
There are a lot of factors in here for sure, and a lot of that is also in the user experience and in who's using these things. So we definitely see that a lot of success is coming down to the expertise required for actually using all of these pieces when they do come together. Dan, I'd like to get a little bit of your perspective on how we might see that expertise develop sufficiently. And, you know, Fast Radius doing what you do, you offer that expertise to your customers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And sharing that expertise and making sure that when we work with a customer, we partner with them, we're not just printing parts, or we're not just saying, here's the solution, but we're talking through why is that the solution. We're looking across the different platforms and explaining the pros and cons of each, and helping a customer to figure out why is it that we're using a particular technology is really important. Because I think what that does is it doesn't just help to get this particular application we may be working on through the process, but it helps them, that team, to understand where additive is going to be a good fit in the future. And then as they go back to their business and they're looking for where additive could provide further value, they're developing their next product, they say, hey, we know if we utilize this technology, we could see a lot of value. And so I think educating the customer base and working in a partnership there is really important to drive wider adoption. And I also think that beyond those that are just already in the industry trying to use the technology now, there's definitely opportunities for the entire industry to partner with academia to work on some of the front end, those students that are coming out of universities, whether that's in engineering, perhaps a technical degree, to get actual hands-on experience. Additive still isn't widely adopted, so it's not easy to get in front of some of the latest and greatest additive platforms. So by organizations working on that piece too, we're making sure that the next generation of engineers and all that talent that's coming in has been exposed to this. And I think that combination of working with the customer base and those already in industry and those coming up through gives a really solid solution to help grow that knowledge base.
Which is a great point. And kind of complicating that a little bit more, we keep seeing even more solutions coming up that will require more expertise. And so that also makes today's chat really timely, because Josh, Fortify has just introduced new solutions today. So you've been talking a lot about creating new solutions that aren't what's already available. And we've been seeing that with the Flex One that's already been shipping for over half a year now. But today, Fortify has introduced 2 new 3D printers and new software. So where does all of this fit in now to what Fortify is doing and what your vision is for applications-driven development?
That's a great question. It is timely. I would encourage anyone to visit the Fortify website to learn more. We are launching additional systems. Our platform really is focused on using these heavily filled photopolymers. And to get back to Ken's point on growing the pie, there's a lot of emphasis on, I would say, a pretty narrow scope of material performance. And so we're really focused on really opening the aperture of what materials can be processed, and the systems that we're bringing to market today really, I would say, enable that. And so, what we've found is, getting back to application-driven development, there are a number of heavily filled materials that are in the traditional injection molding market today. And David, to your point, I don't think we need to enable every one of those, but oftentimes those are all targeted towards very specific needs of an application. And so what we've found is, for an application to be successful, there's usually some gap between the materials that are off the shelf, so to speak, today, and what's needed in the functional environment. And oftentimes the rate limiting step is getting those materials developed quickly enough to be used for a particular application. And that leads into our Flex Developer package that we just launched. It's a software-driven system that essentially accelerates material development of these filled photopolymer systems using the Fortify hardware.
Hey, so that's pretty exciting, and I did spend a little time reading over and watching some of the videos, so those announcements are pretty promising from the outset, so that's exciting. But now, as we keep this rolling, I want to open this up to more of a discussion. I'm going to stop asking you guys each questions individually and just open up the floor for you four. So one of the challenges we're really seeing in crossing that adoption chasm today is in materials development. For example, a specific application will have specific functional requirements. And it can be hard to find that fit in a 3D printable material, since that industry is so new, to Ken's point about just having a small percentage of those available materials. So how do materials development partnerships form? And then how do those partnerships aim to tackle these issues? Really kind of what I want to get at here is who's in the driver's seat? Who's driving application-specific solutions?
Yeah, I mean, this is super important, and we've been spending a lot of internal time. I've been spending a lot of internal time discussing this exact subject. How do we invest? What do we invest in? How do we partner with end users and equipment manufacturers to deliver solutions? And like Josh was touching on, you can't go after everything. So I still believe that material science is holding back the industry. It's one of the key components in an emerging market. An emerging market emerges as the technology meets the needs of the market, and the market has a huge number of needs that are unaddressed. So we don't have to invent it all overnight. We can launch the iPhone 1 and then the iPhone 2 and then the iPhone 3, and that's our approach to development. But I think that we all have to invest in the solution, have the right partners that are investing as well, meaning that the person that approached you from company X has their manager and their manager's manager on board, and they're ready to invest in this process with us to make sure that we can bring it to market. And so I think that understanding that is really important early in the game, is understanding the whole supply chain's investment and bringing this solution to place is incredibly important.
Yeah, you can't create value until you solve a problem, right? So I spend most of my time out in the industry trying to identify the right problems that we should be solving. Why we partner with these, big materials providers is, one, because, they have technical resources to develop new materials, but really probably more importantly is they have, decades of experience solving very specific industry problems, right? They have breadth into what engineers in all these different industries are trying to accomplish. And, they've been solving them with their toolbox of new materials for a long time. So tapping into that understanding of these are the things that people want to do, these are the problems that still exist that Additive may be able to solve. That's one of the big benefits of working with some of these big traditional, materials providers bring to the industry, like a Henkel or a BASF or somebody like that.
Yeah, David, to build off of that, there's tremendous, I think, developmental pressure to take some of the well-established chemistries from some of these multi-billion-dollar material companies and enable them on an additive manufacturing process or platform. And we see opportunities where there's very high-value material that can only be sourced through like a conventional board stock or laminate or some type of bar stock, and then is being pushed through secondary manufacturing processes to try and get it into a final form. And I think that OEMs, or at least I think part of Fortify's role in this equation, is to make it easier to adopt or facilitate those new materials on the additive manufacturing platform, and also really focus on how some of the inherent benefits of 3D printing can provide value that goes beyond just not having to machine a traditional material, but can take advantage of new geometries or design principles.
So if we go into that and a little bit more of, everyone has their part to play. What are those parts? How might we broadly define the role of the contract manufacturer versus the OEM versus the customer when it comes to adoption?
So I'll take that one to start here. I think that there's definitely a distinct role that each plays. As a solutions provider and manufacturer kind of in the middle, I would say, from my perspective, from our team's perspective, our job is to help the end customer navigate the different technologies that are out there. And for us, that is between additive and more traditional injection molding, CNC, what is really the right solution for the challenge they have. From the customer, what we need upfront is transparency and the requirements. What do they really need the solution to do? And what that does, it just helps to accelerate finding the right solution to solve the right problem. And it increases the chances of success with additive adoption as well. If we get the right requirements up front, there's a much higher likelihood of success of that because we'll be able to pick the right technology, or we'll be able to say, hey, additive may not be a fit for this, and do it early and move to the next program. The challenge is if you don't have all the right requirements up front and something comes up a couple months into the program, that can really throw a wrench into things. And I would say on the OEM side, we look at the platform providers, the material providers, definitely a partnership mentality when working with the solutions providers, with the manufacturers and the end customer, so that when we're working on the economics of this solution, right, we say we have a high volume project, we need to make the economics work here, being able to navigate that in partnership, figure out how we get adoption done, because that's going to benefit everybody up and down.
Yeah, this is, kind of the big question here is like, adoption is a big investment, right? So who makes that? Thankfully, this is something that the free market figures out really well, right? Who's going to make this investment? It's whoever thinks that they can create a competitive advantage by doing so, right? If I'm a material provider and I think investing in application development grows my business in a scalable way, I do that. If I'm a parts provider and I think solving digital manufacturing solutions in a scalable way across many technologies is a great business model, I go do that. If I'm a hardware OEM and I think that doing application development lends me business, and higher margin, I do that, right? So as we see who does this, it just comes down to who is going to find those areas where they are uniquely positioned to add value, but do it so in a scalable way, right? And we haven't seen that all shake out yet. Sometimes it's at the end use, customer, somebody that wants to use the technology to create a new, better product, right? Because that's their business model. In terms of this ecosystem, though, it'll be people looking for how do I create a competitive advantage by doing more of this upfront investment to capture more of this highly, highly competitive market.
Those are definitely some great points. And there's a lot to build on there, and we've got some really good questions coming in. So we just have a couple more questions of our own to address before we break more into some of these specifics. So I'd love to ask you guys your thoughts on how does finding and identifying problems to solve lead to value in manufacturing, specifically, of course, in additive manufacturing, and how can that sort of value then scale, kind of building on that idea of scalability that, of course, we've been talking about and David just brought up as well.
I think the interesting thing about additive is that it enables solutions to problems that in some cases we didn't really know we had in the past. Completely new technology solves problems like, for example, maybe I've got a bill of materials that's 2 pages long, but with traditional manufacturing technologies, that's just the way it was. And it seemed like we optimized everything, but you introduce additive and all of a sudden you've got the ability to make the unmakeable, things you just couldn't do before, to combine components, to make completely new designs, to think completely differently. And so I think that simplification of design is a way you can generate tremendous value. You can reduce cost, you can produce new products you couldn't do before, you can produce products faster, and all those things bring value to manufacturing. Again, just could not be done in the past in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
Dan.
That's actually one of our issues, excuse me, is knowing how to leverage a completely new capability. Takes time for the designers, the engineers, the graphic artists to be able to leverage that. And I think that that's almost a holdback. Is you can lightweight a product, you can make it strong in ways you never could before, and we're stuck in let's say, an injection molding mindset. So that even that's another area that we have to educate the industry and push them to leverage the unique capabilities of additive manufacturing.
And Ken, I think that's a great point. Just to add, one thing we see a lot of is here's a component today in injection molding. What if we wanted to produce that in additive? And we're always saying, hey, let's take a systems level perspective. Let's think bigger than just what has traditionally been that part, right? Let's look at the whole system and see what value additive can provide. So completely agree with you.
Yeah, Dan, that builds into a point you made earlier around education. And as a follow-up question, I'm curious if you've sensed maybe more maturity or familiarity with some of the subtleties or unique advantages of 3D printing and some of the, or additive manufacturing in the customers you work with. But it seems to me like with every big win where there's really good application fit, meaning unique material that can meet the manufacturing demands and provides value you can't get any other way, that when those proof points become more, I would say, common, that the adoption cycle starts to move a bit faster because you can use those as really valuable proof points of using additive.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a number of engagements where we've seen kind of the evolution, over a number of years of the customer, and they're learning how to use the technology and embracing that. And some of these technologies, MJF, carbon, is still so new. Josh, what your team is doing, there's definitely a learning curve there. One good example maybe I'll share here is the work that we did with Satair, which is the MRO arm of Airbus. We worked with them starting many years back. Initially, when they came to us and we first discussed, they were really focused on SLS, FDM, some kind of more legacy technologies. And then over time, MJF came to the fore as kind of this main solution, what could help their business. So it's interesting to see the relationship we have with them and going from just having a lower knowledge base on that technology and not fully understanding how to utilize it. And then through working with us in that education cycle and adoption now, things coming to us right away with additive in mind, and that just spreading. And we see that across a number of customers. It takes time, but there's definitely kind of a growing rate of adoption from what we can see.
Okay, perfect. We're going to move into our Q&A in just a second here, and we do have a lot of really great questions that have come in. Attendees, you do still have a few more minutes to add if you have anything else coming to mind. But right before we do head over there, I would like to ask each of our 4 panelists for kind of your final word. This can be a literal final word or a phrase or just a quick piece of advice. But what is the one thing you would say is needed for large-scale adoption of additive manufacturing? Josh, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I may be stealing Ken's thunder here, but I'm gonna really go again with the high value materials. Of course, you need the reliable manufacturing, but high value materials would be my answer to that. Perfect.
Well then, let's see what Ken has to say.
You stole my thunder. No, I really believe that the materials need to deliver a lot. There needs to be a lot of application development and investment in that area, of course. But materials hold responsibility, a lot of responsibility for emerging this market. And I really believe that material suppliers need to do some heavy lifting and deliver really amazing products that will fill that hole and emerge the market for everybody.
Awesome. I think your thunder is your own, David. Let's go to you next.
Outsiders. Yeah, there's a lot of technology development I see that doesn't have a clear problem statement, right? What drives the industry forward was somebody that sees a problem in their industry that they think digital manufacturing can solve, right? Was the clear aligner developed by a 3D printing person? No, it was developed by somebody who wanted to make a better solution to braces, right? Those sorts of things. So people with deep industry expertise in a different industry that think that additive manufacturing might be able to help them. That's what drives the industry forward.
Okay, awesome. And Dan?
Yeah, I would say really, I think broad awareness of modern additive technologies and capabilities. I mean, once we have just broad awareness, not necessarily knowing exactly how to apply the technology, but just awareness of what's there and what can be done, I think that really helps to drive adoption across industry.
I think you all brought up really interesting and very necessary parts of what we're looking at when it comes to this. But let's look at what everyone else thinks now. We've got a pretty nice and busy Q&A box. So let's dig into it. First up, we've got, if companies are scaling up 3D production, also the manual labor and thereby the cost in post-processing will increase exponentially. What does the AM industry need to get the cost per part as low as possible?
Yeah, it kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier, is you have these kind of different tiers of production, right? And when you're low volumes, you're not that efficient. Now, at high volumes, this isn't a fundamental problem, right? Factory system integrators can do amazing things to automate just about anything, right? So if you're talking about post-processing parts, not something any of these people haven't seen before. A lot of the problem with labor and all of that is when you're still in that inefficient stage, hey, I've got one printer, I have to hire a guy full time, and maybe he only has 2 hours of work to do, right? So you're in this really inefficient stage that we have to work to get through. But at the high end, yeah, automation, all of that, it's not anything that these big factory system integrators haven't done before.
And I think even thinking one step further beyond kind of the systems as they are now, as we see wider adoption, you see larger facilities, of course, more automated post-processing solutions. I mean, we want our team members working on things that are adding value, solving problems, and not having to do essentially the manual labor component of additive. So I think smart investments there and developments by organizations there is going to be really important. And then also, I think that there is, in digital manufacturing, there's a piece that software will play to hopefully on the front end, some of the work that we do today, engineering checks, the needs to do all sorts of manual intervention just to get to the point where you can do a build. Trying to eliminate and smooth that stuff out is going to be really important to keeping costs low and making it more and more competitive as we scale.
Awesome. We've got a question for Ken in here. And this will be a fun one because I love questions with the word secret in them. So what's Henkel's secret to developing so many resins so quickly for so many different partners?
I think it was a lot of really hard work quite a few years ago. Understanding, we spent a lot of time trying to understand all the monomers in the market, all the oligomers in the market, and collecting a huge amount of data around that effort. And as we started to be able to leverage that data, we created a software system we call Albert that allows us to really leverage the data. The way we bring in a new raw material and understand that fully is gives us a lot of horsepower, and we've had a really good run of leveraging that horsepower of the data we collected over 5 years. And so I really believe that's it. And I also think I come from the inkjet industry. My last company was an inkjet company, and in that industry, we had very low viscosity products where we could only have monomers. And our approach to making a product is literally opposite of what most people in the industry is, and it's given us some really unique insight into the way to solve problems by focusing on kind of a different side of the formula. So I really believe that it's the investment and our data centric. We consider ourselves a data company focusing on material science, and we're starting to really see some advantages of that.
Okay. Moving from materials over to another part of the industry that's very important for all of this, how important is software technology in understanding behavior of new and advanced materials as a means to reduce cost and time?
Yeah, actually, I can take this one. When I hear software in relation to additive, I usually think of it on one hand with design and then analysis, on the other hand with process control. So as far as reducing cost and time, I think there's a tremendous amount of leverage that can be gained using software to not only speed up print process, but reduce the amount of effort required for post-processing. And we've seen that play a huge role, at least within our own materials. And on the design side, obviously, the more you can do in silico, the faster, the less parts you have to print to learn, whether or not you're hitting the design or the intent required by the application.
Yeah, I think the question, around software for materials was interesting. One gap that we found, it's not even so much a software gap, it's a data gap, is when I start doing complex FEA, I need very detailed material models, right? And they don't exist, right? They haven't been provided by the industry. So you have to go and then build those. So the more we can create those data sets that I can plug into Altair or other simulation software is there, the data's not there, right? So that's the kind of the big holdup in some of these advanced design workflows, at least on the polymer side. It's already there in the titaniums, right? All the high value metals. But getting good material models at high strain rates, different temperatures, things like that for plastics is holding back the simulation side of the industry.
Okay, if we dig in right there a little bit, we've got another question that's a little bit related, which is building on confidence for all of these things. So the question is in regards to the medical device sector, and I think we can, obviously extrapolate out from there, but in regards to the medical device sector, how do you address confidence in materials, mitigate risk, and support validation for unproven materials for end-use products?
I can address that. We spent an enormous amount of time getting ISO 13485 approved, which will get our final approval in 3 weeks here. And so following the design and development protocols and the ISO 1345 medical device regulation really helps us. And, a lot of people have a problem with regulation. I've always been pro-regulation. It gives me a rule book to play by to give safe products, whether it's for food packaging in the past or for medical device today. And following those regulations, doing the work, holding constant the workflow or the data, or what we're starting to call internally our digital twin. So for that part, we have to document a digital twin for that, so that all the data associated with that part, whether it's the incoming quality control of the raw materials or the processing parameters of me manufacturing the liquid or us manufacturing the part, having that information available, documenting it, educating the person who's manufacturing that to make sure that they follow the workflow. And when they follow the workflow, they get this part at the end that's safe. And we've proven that because we've done the work. And so a medical device product should not enter this market. I think it's a big hazard of this market is to have medical device products that haven't gone through the careful research that's required to put it out in the market. And so educating the market on what an indication of use and how to meet the information for use or the processing of that product to put out a safe product, I think is really, really important. And those that are entering the medical world of 3D printing have a lot to be careful about and make sure that we don't make a mistake that bruises our industry ego in this area.
Yeah, a lot of people running, skiing, jumping on 3D printed hips. So I hope we're building confidence slowly.
That's a good point. And we also have another question that's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg look at a little bit of what Ken had just been addressing. So bear with me for this one. There are plenty of applications that can work with current materials, but I'm with Ken, this question says. Materials development is incredibly important for adoption. My question based on that is, how do you balance what comes first? The materials or the applications need? Most companies won't develop a material until there's an application need, but there are also many companies that struggle with finding applications if the materials don't exist already. So what comes first, the need or the material?
I can address part of that. I fully agree with the person that asked that question. We need a certain amount of materials out there so that the industry can get used to it and lead us down the path to what the next generation product needs to be. And that's been part of our philosophy, is putting out a lot of products. In this case, we put out 5 tough products. We're putting out 6 elastomers. We're putting out a handful of medical products so that there's a platform out there that people can learn from and learn what they like and what they don't like, what they need. And so I think that us doing this kind of approach where we put out a lot of products, and often we're trying to invent a product for the electrical connector market that has really tough, high HDT and high toughness requirements. And we came out with a product on our way there that was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's launch that. Because we didn't hit the goal, but I think that there's use cases out there for that type of technology. And so I think this person's right. They need products to play with. We're putting out a toolbox out there for the industry to play with and give us feedback on.
And when we're talking, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what he's described is it can't be this transactional relationship, hardware player customer, material player customer, right? These are deep engagements, understanding the space and working together and solving them.
definitely there are a lot of layers to this pie. It's kind of more of a lasagna where everything bakes in all together for a delicious whole. Also, it's lunchtime for me. But when we talk about beyond lunch, this different toolbox approach of what we're looking at, obviously we know when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everyone loves to say that, but not every issue is a nail. We don't always need that hammer. We don't always need an additive answer, as much as it pains my additive heart to admit that. I think we can all agree that still the best place for a 3D printer is alongside other solutions to build a comprehensive whole. So we've got two questions that I see in as fitting together really nicely when it talks about this toolbox approach and how you engage with customers. So I'm going to ask both questions and open this up to the panelists. So the first of these is, how would you work with a client who wants to adopt AM because they think it is fascinating, even though you feel the application they have in mind is not a fit? And second question is, what's the most critical information to share from a customer perspective to help drive adoption of AM?
Well, I'll start with answering the first one. If we've got a customer that thinks additive is great and they say, we really want to produce something with additive, and sometimes we get that, and we'll even get a customer that really likes one particular technology, we'll definitely try to slow the conversation down and explain the pros and cons of the different additive platforms. And there's no doubt that we oftentimes too will steer someone away from additive if it's just not the right fit. I think ultimately for anyone that's in the space, you had to take on the right applications and had to be honest about what is the correct application, what's not. Because if you try to force a square peg into a round hole, ultimately you create a bad customer experience, and that probably just further delays adoption of additive. So I think it might be a difficult conversation, but from my perspective, you have to have that conversation, say, hey, maybe this is not a fit. Let's talk about what is a fit instead.
Yeah, so the answer to what information is shared, it's all of it, right? The only way you make progress is by building trust. And my way of building trust is sometimes telling you, my technology isn't the best way to do this, right? It's a big part of it. And I can talk to you about why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to build off of that, that's where back to the chicken and egg, the applications need is still very important. It's a really challenging product management exercise, but making sure you're focused on solving the right problem that's going to still be the right solution, a year or two down the road, and essentially give the customers some sustainable value proposition is really important. So it takes a balance of letting users play and try to maybe come up with things you didn't see coming, and also listening very carefully to the real pain they're trying to solve.
Sure. Okay, we've got time for one last question. It's another doozy, but this will be our final question right now. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. This one is for Ken. Ken, you had mentioned previously that the industry-specific users were a big drive for new applications. Later, though, you cited your proponency for standards. Would you consider the prerequisite of standards as a bottleneck for this innovation if one of the obstacles is to convince new users to adopt the technology and make that leap? Would introducing standards such as this encumber this process or expedite it?
That's a really good question, and let me try to unpack that a little bit. Standards are a requirement that must be achieved to get to the end goal. So I don't see them as a bottleneck, or while it might slow it down, it's a requirement of the end use part. And I think that identifying whatever those requirements are for whatever end use for additive manufacturing is a requirement. So if you kind of try to speed that up, you shortcut on the regulatory part, or you shortcut on understanding the requirements, you're not going to end up with a solution at the end. So I think that no matter what if it's regulatory or non-regulatory requirements, I don't think it's a bottleneck. I think it's a required path that you have to take.
Yeah. All right, I love it. And that is our time for today. So thank you so much, David, Dan, Ken, and Josh, for all of your insights, having a great conversation. Thank you for all of our attendees for joining us live today and asking fantastic questions. For Fortify, Fast Radius, Henkel, HP, and Additive Integrity, I'm Sarah Goehrke. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.